After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the people of the newly formed nation of Tajikistan, which was a former province of the Soviet Union, were hopeful for a bright future without repression. However, the Russians wanted to maintain indirect control of Tajikistan through the same people that ruled the region during the Soviet period. This Russian plot was revealed after the first post-independence elections were rigged in favor of Rahman Nabiev, who was a former Soviet minister. Therefore, thousands of protesters took to the streets demanding fair elections. However, President Rahman Nabiev reacted with brutal force and began killing protesters. As a result, the people of Tajikistan picked up their weapons and began fighting. Although President Rahman Nabiev had the full political and military support of Russia, the Tajik people were motivated by the recent defeat of the Russians in neighboring Afghanistan. However, this did not last long, as the Russians intervened and sent military support to the pro-Russian militias, who eventually recaptured the capital of Dushanbe and installed the pro-Russian Imam Ali Rahman as the president of Tajikistan. Therefore, a full-scaled armed revolution erupted in Tajikistan. The people of Tajikistan rallied around an influential religious leader known as Sayyid Abdullah Nouri, who was a famous activist during the Soviet period. During the late Soviet period, Sayyid Abdullah Nouri formed an illegal organization which distributed banned Islamic literature. In 1987, Sayyid Abdullah Nouri was arrested by Soviet authorities after he organized a demonstration condemning the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and supporting the Afghan Mujahideen. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the independence of Tajikistan, Sayyid Abdullah Nouri formed his own political party known as the Islamic Renaissance Party, which called for a fair and just Islamic democracy. He participated in the first elections after independence. However, after it was revealed that the elections were rigged in favor of a pro-Russian government, Sayyid Abdullah Nouri became a rebel. He mobilized the Tajik people and established the United Tajik Opposition, which engaged in guerrilla warfare against the corrupt government of Imam Ali Rahman. The United Tajik Opposition was supported by religious scholars, liberals, and Democrats, and aimed to establish a just government in Tajikistan. In order to gain a steady supply of weapons, Sayyid Abdullah Nouri turned to the neighboring nation of Afghanistan, which had recently been liberated from Russian occupation. The United Tajik Opposition conducted guerrilla warfare against the Russian-backed government, and the war lasted for 5 years. By 1997, the forces of Sayyid Abdullah Nouri had gained significant territory in the Gorno-Badakhshan province. Sayyid Abdullah Nouri signed a peace agreement with President Imam Ali Rahman, agreeing to form a government with a new constitution and agreeing to allow the participation of opposition parties. However, this government was a failure and was filled with corruption. All elections were rigged in favor of the ruling party, and Sayyid Abdullah Nouri's party only won 2 out of 63 seats in the parliament, despite being very popular. During his time in the government, Sayyid Abdullah Noori contributed to developing foreign relations and forming relations with countries such as China, encouraging them to invest in the new united Tajikistan. Sayyid Abdullah Noori later began criticizing the president for his corruption. He criticized the lack of clean water in the country, despite the fact that Tajikistan owned 60% of Central Asia's freshwater sources. However, his calls for reform fell on deaf ears. The democratic process failed, and many members of Sayyid Abdullah Noori's party were assassinated by government agents. For example, in September 1998, Ota Khan Latifi, who was a member of the United Tajik opposition, was assassinated by government agents. In 2001, after the beginning of the so-called War on Terror led by the US, the government of Tajikistan became very close to the Americans and increased their crackdown on the opposition, using the pretext of fighting against terror. Sayyid Abdullah Noori spoke out against the US invasion of neighboring Afghanistan and continued to criticize the government of Tajikistan until his assassination. On 9th August 2006, Sayyid Abdullah Noori was assassinated by the government with the approval and support of the Americans. After his death, all of his property was confiscated by the government, and the opposition movement in Tajikistan began to fade away.